So here we are with Naomi Kahn from Regavim. You're the international director, and we are really pleased to have you join us for this interview. So maybe first tell us a little bit about Regavim, why it was established and what you're doing.
Terrific. Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me. When there's no international travel, this is as close as we get. So I'm on vacation in Scandinavian countries this morning, without leaving my home. Regavim was established about 15 years ago, with a very basic understanding that the question of land use policy is the very bedrock of sovereignty. Mm-hmm. Meaning our most basic resource is the land itself. And the question of who uses that land, to what purposes, who decides who uses it, and who enforces the law about the use of that very basic resource, seemed to us to be the expression, really, of Israeli sovereignty in the territory. Not only in Judea and Samaria, we are active everywhere throughout the land of Israel. So we divide the country up into regions. We have a northern region, the southern region, and central region, which includes Judea and Samaria. For those of you who haven't looked at a map recently, Judea and Samaria really is the center of the country. There's a reason why they call it the heartland of Israel, because it really is right in the heart of the country. So we divide the country into regions. We have field coordinators who go out every day and see what's happening, who's using the land, and who's allowed to use it, what is being done, and with whose permission.
But shouldn't that be the responsibility of the government?
It most certainly should. We're one of the few organizations that I know that actually hopes that we will become redundant, that we will be put out of business, that the government itself will protect our national interests to the point that we are no longer necessary. Quite unfortunately, that is not what we're finding down on the ground, nowhere in Israel, and most particularly not in Judea and Samaria.
Why is that, you think?
The Israeli government faces massive international pressure. The massive international pressure is far more challenging than it should be, for a variety of reasons. But the activity that is going on in Judea and Samaria, the illegal activity that's going on in Judea and Samaria, is actually massively supported, both politically, diplomatically, and financially, by European governments and the European Union itself, by the United Nations, and by a host of international organizations, church groups, etc.
So when you say illegal activity for a Norwegian air, that's automatically perceived to be Israeli illegal settlements.
Okay.
So explain that to me, please.
That's a very good question. I think we should take a short history lesson, very short history lesson, to understand what makes something illegal in Judea and Samaria. What is the law? Who created that law, and what it means thereafter when you call something legal or illegal. And I think that looking at the facts of the case will be very surprising for most people. I find people tend to repeat what they see and read and hear over and over and over again without actually questioning the very basic legal premise upon which these things should be based. So again, Regavim is a law-based organization. What we do is we call for equal and universal enforcement of the law in order to protect us from devolving into chaos, in order to protect us from constant conflict, and in order to clear the way for a negotiated resolution to the conflict. So let's take a quick look. If I can, I will share my screen, and we'll have a look at a few slides that will give us a historical background of the legal parameters in which we operate.
Please.
See if I can do this. Here we are. Yes, share. Okay, oops, I forgot to do something. Hold on a minute. Stop share. I'm supposed to optimize this, right? Optimize and share sound. Whoa. Right, let's see. Okay, so I'm actually going to start at the beginning. That's a good place. All right, let me make
Here we go.
bigger. Okay, so Regavim is, again, committed to protecting Israel's resources through equal and universal law enforcement. That is, in a nutshell, what we do and what we try to do. What we do is field work, really, research. Once we get our field data, we collect it, we come and research exactly what is the legal status of each case, of each instance of use of land resources. And then when necessary, we pursue legal action in the courts in order to encourage and empower the state of Israel itself to do its job, the Israeli government to do its job and to protect our national interests. So now we're going to take a look at the background to what is the law? What is the law that is in force in Judea and Samaria? And you see here, this is the original map of the British Mandate for Palestine. Mm-hmm. Again, at the San Remo conference and then later at the Cairo conference, the British were given a mandate to preserve and protect this area, the entire area that is colored here. You can see it. Yeah. Until such time as an independent Jewish homeland could be established. And immediately, almost immediately afterwards, actually cut off 80% of that mandated territory and created Jordan. For reasons of its own, the British had geopolitical interests and needed to placate the Arabs. So this was what I like to call the first two-state solution. And we're going to hear over and over again about the two-state solution. And I'd just like you to keep in mind that this has been tried not once, not twice, but at least 3 times. And you will see the results as we move forward. But again, this is the first two-state solution, the creation of a Palestinian Arab state and maintaining some 20%, just over 20% of the territory for a Jewish state in Palestine.
Yeah, yeah.
Now,
because before this time, when it was under the Ottoman Empire, the Palestine didn't have any geographical clear boundaries, and it included even an area east of the Jordan River.
Correct. Palestine was never an entity; it was a region. Yeah. The same way that you would now use the word Levant or Scandinavia. Scandinavia is not a country.
Yeah,
it's a region, right? So all of this was considered Palestine. As you can see, there were other mandates that were created at the same time, the French mandate, the British mandate for Iraq, and other countries that were given their independence when the Ottoman Empire essentially ceased to exist with the advent of World War I. Yeah. So this is these are the legal boundaries. What you see here, the legal boundaries of this Jewish homeland, the state of Israel. You will notice that everything west of the Jordan was considered Palestine, Jewish Palestine, eventually the state of Israel. So this, again, the first two-state solution was meant to prevent the continuing bloodshed, the Arab riots. As we know, it didn't work. The Arab riots continued, so the most famous of which were in 1929. But let's move a little further along, and you can see here that this was an attempt at a second two-state solution. The General Assembly of the United Nations that proposed 2 states within the remaining 20%. Yeah. Although these are more or less impossible boundaries, the Jewish community agreed, the Arabs rejected this second two-state solution and progressed towards the war of 1948, which is known as Israel's War of Independence. So the map that resulted from that war looked like this. What happened here is what began to be called at that point the West Bank because it was west of the banks of the Jordan River,
Mhm.
was invaded, illegally occupied, and eventually illegally annexed by Jordan.
Yeah.
I would stress that no countries, except for two in the world, recognized Jordan's occupation or annexation of territory west of the Jordan. Even the countries of the Arab League condemned Jordan for this action and did not recognize Jordanian sovereignty in these areas.
So did the Arab states reject it because they wanted the Palestinian Arab state there, or because they were envious of Jordan having it, or do you know?
I believe it was a combination. Each of the Arab states had their own reasons for rejecting Jordan's. Well, first of all, Jordan wasn't necessarily considered a legitimate Arab country by the other Arab states. The leadership of Jordan was actually imported from the Arabian Peninsula. They were not what we would call indigenous. They were not from this area. They were not Palestinians. So their taking more territory was not seen favorably by the other Arab states. In addition, the other Arab states felt that this was a compromise that would prevent them from obliterating Israel altogether.
Yeah.
So there were various reasons, each to his own, why the Arab states rejected this. But the countries of the world, all of the United Nations, rejected Jordanian occupation and annexation of the quote unquote West Bank. This was a term that was created by the Jordanians in order to justify their presence to the west of the Jordan. Until that time, in all international documentation, all history books, all legal discourse, these areas were known as Judea and Samaria. The term West Bank was invented by the Jordanians. So we try not to use that terminology simply because it proposes that this is simply two sides of the banks of the river and all belong to Jordan. We do not. Yes.
Yeah. Go. So what were these areas called in Arabic language before, say, the First World War?
So the interesting thing is that there were no names for any of this area, not for Jordan, not for Iraq, not for Saudi Arabia. This was all Greater Syria. Essentially, they were different districts of the Ottoman Empire, which was massive at certain points in history, but there was no name for it. I would also point out that the land in this area was completely worthless. It was barren. There were almost no inhabitants here. And you can see in the late 1800s, when the American author Mark Twain traveled through this area, he said you could travel for 3 days and never see a human being. It was barren. It was desolate. And again, during the Ottoman Empire, it was worthless. So it was dead land. So it really didn't have a name per se.
Yeah, but I guess there was some like regional name for the local people.
Yeah, they called it Judea and Samaria.
Yeah, so, even the Arabs?
More or less, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So there were governorates that they called it the area of, let's say, the area of Nablus or the area of Hebron, Al-Khalil, or these sorts of things. But there weren't actually regional monikers the way that we are accustomed to today, because there was no need for them. It was barren land, and it was, there was the desert, and there was nothing much happening there until Jewish settlement began in more or less 100 to 150 years ago. Yeah. So this, again, was the only two countries that actually recognized the Jordanian occupation and annexation of what they called the West Bank were Great Britain, again, for the same reasons that they created Jordan to begin with, and Pakistan. Yeah. And that was their prerogative, but they recognized Jordanian rule. No one else did, and it was roundly condemned. Now, this is very, very interesting, because when you talk now about sovereignty or about rights to this territory, who has the rights? Yeah. Because international law, going back to the 1920s, recognized all of everything to the west of the Jordan as part of the Jewish homeland. There are no other groups with competing or parallel claims to this territory. When Jordan annexed this territory, it was completely condemned because they had no claim to this territory. International law recognized that this was part of the remaining 20% that had been set aside for Jewish settlement. So let's move further along. The map looked like this for 19 years, from 1948 until 1967. And this is what the map ended up looking like in 1967. As you know, in 1967, in a war of self-defense, Israel managed to reclaim areas that had been illegally occupied and annexed by Jordan. And this is what the map looked like then. And you can see that the area that was before annexed and was in purple is now in white. It's not, and it's neither here nor there. Here's where the problem begins. In 1968, the state of Israel decided of its own volition not to annex this territory, you can't actually annex something that under international law belongs to you. So the state of Israel had two choices. It could either declare that it had repatriated these areas and was extending its law and full sovereignty to the areas that had originally been intended as part of its borders, or not. Israel did neither one. It kind of left things in limbo and said, we will determine at a future time through negotiation what the final status of these areas will be in terms of the population, not in terms of the land itself, because it could not make any other decision under international law. This was always supposed to be part of Israel, and there was no other recognized sovereign. Other than the Ottoman Empire, which no longer existed, there had not been any other sovereignty in this area for years, many years, decades. So Israel voluntarily decided to treat the population, the Arab population of this area, according to the Geneva Conventions in certain areas of law, and to retain the existing layers of law in the area. So the layers of law included both Ottoman land law, Jordanian law, mandatory law. And all of these things were left intact until a negotiated resolution for the population of this area could be achieved. And this is where the problems begin. So, this temporary situation continues, as you know, until today. And this is what the map looked like from 1967 until 1995. In 1995 and thereabouts.
Welcome to Oslo.
That's correct. A series of agreements was achieved in order to, a series of agreements was achieved in order to try to resolve the conflict that had been raging in the area of Judea and Samaria. A recognition was given, the Palestinian Authority was created under this framework, the Oslo framework, and authority was given to this Palestinian governing body to administer the lives of the people in this territory towards a negotiated resolution, which had never been actually spelled out exactly what, again, the Oslo Accords never mentions a two-state solution. It never calls for the recognition of a Palestinian state. What it does simply is to create a method of Palestinian self-administration until such time as final status negotiations could be completed. So this is what.
When you're saying initially that you are following, observing whether the law is followed in the Judea and Samaria, then you respect the Oslo agreements?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Oslo agreements are international law.
So what you will be telling us later is that there is a massive break of the Oslo agreement from the Palestinian side.
Correct. So let me stress this again, because this is extremely important. What is international law? There is no such thing as a code of international law. What there is a collection of international treaties, which, when ratified and recognized by the nations of the world, or the parties involved, or both, it achieves the status of law. So what is law in Judea and Samaria today is the Oslo Agreement.
Yeah.
Now, the state of Israel enforces the Oslo agreements. It enforces the status in terms of land and land use and land policy. It continues to uphold the temporary situation that it enshrined in 1968, in which it continues to enforce Ottoman land law, Jordanian law, mandatory law, and not Israeli law in these areas. And this creates tremendous anomalies, tremendous problems, because I would point out that Ottoman land law, which is what is in force here, was actually abandoned by the Ottoman Empire itself in 1913. The Ottoman Empire realized that this system of law was completely anachronistic. It was outdated. It was inefficient, and was not a way to actually regulate property rights. So they tried to revamp their entire system of law. By the time World War I broke out, they had not completed in revising all the laws, but they themselves had abandoned this law. And I would point out also that the inheritors of the Ottoman Empire, the government of Turkey, has absolutely no connection to all of this Ottoman land law. They use a modern system, a cadastre system, and the only place in the world where this ridiculous, hundreds of years old system of law is still in force is Judea and Samaria. And the Israeli courts, modern democratic Israeli courts, continue to enforce this outdated system of law. I'll just give you a couple of things to think about. Ottoman land law makes it illegal for Jews to own property, to buy or sell property. This is clearly an anti-Semitic law, which is enforced by the state of Israel, because that is part of Ottoman land law. Ottoman land law prohibits women from owning or inheriting or bequeathing property. And the state of Israel continues to either work around these things, but actually in practice enforce them. So we're dealing with a ridiculous situation in which international pressure does not allow Israel to modernize the system of law and protect people's property rights. And I'm talking about the property rights of both Jews and Arabs in this area because of international pressure.
So now we are talking about Area C.
Yes. So areas A, B, and C. What you see on the map in front of you here, 3 different colors. I apologize for those people who are colorblind. I understand it's very hard to see the difference between these colors. But the brighter red is Area A. The maroon color is Area B. And the yellow color is Area C. The green line is actually what is known as the Green Line, which is the demarcation of land that was repatriated in 1967. So when you see in the newspapers things about within the Green Line or outside the Green Line, over the Green Line, et cetera, the Green Line here is actually green. So what we're talking about here is Area A, which was placed under full Palestinian Authority control. That means jurisdiction for all civilian affairs. That includes health, education, construction, building permits, sewage, everything that a government provides to its civilians. In addition, it's also in charge of security for Area A. That means that the Palestinian police, an armed police force that was trained and armed by the state of Israel, is intended to keep the peace in these areas and to prevent acts of terrorism. The bright red, Area A, is essentially the Arab urban population centers. So the larger Arab cities that you've heard of, including Nablus and Ramallah and Hebron and Tulkarem and all those sorts of places, are all Area A. Area B is the more rural Arab population clusters, and these were created placed under full Palestinian Authority civilian control, meaning all of the citizens in Area B essentially have nothing to do with the state of Israel, but Israel maintained peripheral security responsibility because they are islands within Area C, more or less.
So has the Palestinian Authority renewed the laws, the property regulations and laws within their area?
No.
So they're still also ruling by Ottoman law?
Okay, yes. They are using Jordanian law. Essentially, they're not really enforcing any law. That's a different story. There is a Palestinian judicial system.
Yeah.
Essentially, what it spends most of its time doing is executing people who buy or sell land to Jews.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very little of anything else. So that is a separate problem. And the people who suffer from this lack of law enforcement and lack of legal structure in general are the Palestinians themselves. The Palestinian security apparatus is known for being extremely violent, enforcers of the Palestinian Authority's will. They use torture. They and don't answer to anyone except directly to certain people at the top of the Palestinian Authority pyramid. Internal power struggles there essentially surround the whole question of who will control this Palestinian army. And that's a topic for another day. Yeah. I will say that Regavim has actually in the past funded medical care and legal representation for victims of the Palestinian Authority's security apparatus, people who were tortured, held in prisons, who were killed, family members of people who the Palestinian Authority wanted to put pressure on, who were killed, who were maimed, who were harmed. We're talking about women, children, whole families. And it's an extremely serious situation, but again, the topic for another day.
Yeah. So, after a short break, we will come back with more from Naomi, and she will tell us what happened after the Oslo Accords and how the Palestinian side is breaking it systematically and increasingly the last few years.
Vi håper du vil abonnere på Med Israel for fred på YouTube. Her finner du et stort antall foredrag av internasjonale eksperter, aktuelle direktesendinger og korte videoklipp. Husk å like, abonnere og motta varsler. MIFFs YouTube-kanal vil gi deg noe alle trenger, mer forståelse for Israel.
We are back with Naomi Kahn from Regavim, and we're now looking at the map of after the Oslo Accords, where the Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, was split into 3 legal zones. And maybe we should go directly to this big issue that in Norway we hear all the time. Israel is building new settlements. And there was a ridiculous news report only last week that now Israel was going to build 800 new settlements, which in reality was that Israel had approved 800 new Palestinian homes.
Correct.
So the national broadcaster had to correct 3 or 4 sentences in a short news story when we contacted them. But in reality, there is a massive buildup of Palestinian houses in Area C. And why is that the break of the Oslo agreements?
Okay, the Oslo agreements place Area C, all of this yellow area, under full Israeli jurisdiction. That means all civilian matters. That means building permits, the use of the land resource, infrastructure creation. That means sewage, electricity, water. That means deciding who can build legally and carrying out construction in ways that are sustainable, environmentally logical, and also that will preserve the area in such a way that will allow for a negotiated resolution. That was the whole point of the division of the territory here, placing as many Palestinians as possible under Palestinian Authority jurisdiction, while leaving the open spaces and the territory in Area C open for negotiation. And that is exactly this is how the map should look since Oslo till today. Unfortunately, it looks, well, this, by the way, was the Y Plantation Accords, another corollary to the Oslo Accords, an additional 3% of the territory under Palestinian Authority jurisdiction. Again, this is a nature reserve where there should be no construction whatsoever. It was placed under Palestinian Authority stewardship in order to balance the amount of territory each side was given to administer. Unfortunately, the reality began to look like this. This is a map that we created through our field work several years ago. And what you see here are these purple dots. And what I'd like to discuss today are exactly that, these purple dots and the actual changes in the map. When did these changes really begin to take off? They began to take off when the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, Salam Fayyad, who is here in this picture, launched this plan, known now as the Thyad Plan. It was called Ending the Occupation, Establishing the State. In 2009, I would reiterate that 2009 was only 4 years after the State of Israel ceded every last inch of what it had committed to cede to Palestinian Authority control. And in 2009, Salam Fayyad said, Oslo is over. It is not going to give us the state that we want. Therefore, we are going to now take a new course. And that is de facto creation of an independent Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria, specifically in Area C, because areas A and B were already under Palestinian Authority control. So from that time onwards, Salam Fayyad, the Palestinian Authority, and increasingly the international community, this, for example, is a press release by the European Union in 2011, where they declare that they will begin to actively support the Palestinian plan to create an independent state focusing on Area C. And ever since, they have done so to the tune of hundreds of millions of euros. Now, they know full well that this is illegal. So what you get...
But just to make it clear for the viewers, the purple dots on the previous map,
yes,
they are Palestinian buildings.
Yes, these are all illegal outposts, Palestinian outposts. Okay, so I'm going to show you a map a little further on. I just want to show you what these purple dots look like a little bit closer up. But the key here is that the European Union and European member states and international organizations have actively funded and supported the creation of a Palestinian state through creation of facts on the ground, one-sided, unilateral construction in areas under full Israeli jurisdiction. This is a breach of law. This is a breach of the Oslo Accords. Unfortunately, the international pressure is such that the State of Israel continues to pretend that the Oslo Accords are still in effect, that everything is as it should be, and it ignores the facts on the ground or takes extremely half-hearted steps, making statements every now and again, and you'll see a few demolitions here or there.
So to play the devil's advocate, has Israelis built in Area A or B?
No, there are no Israelis in Area A or B. Zero, not one. They are completely, They are completely what is known as Judenrein, meaning there are no Jews in areas A or B. There is not one single brick of Jewish construction or Jewish life in areas A or B. So Area C is the battleground.
So where Israelis has built, I just want to make it clear for the viewers, is in Area C, where they have full rights according to international law and the Oslo agreements to do zoning and building.
Correct. Under international law, under the Geneva Conventions, under the Oslo Accords, under every international treaty, under the UN Charter, under every single system that is in force here, the State of Israel has full jurisdiction and a responsibility to build in Area C, to provide infrastructure in Area C, to lay water pipes, to lay sewage pipes, to treat waste removal, to develop the area for the benefit of people who are living there. That means both Jews and Arabs in Area C, but only permitted construction. So when Jews build something for which they don't have a building permit in Area C, the state of Israel knocks it down immediately, vigorously, uncompromisingly. So you have situations in which houses were built legally, municipal lines were redrawn years after the fact, years after the houses were standing. The government of Israel received complaints from international rights groups saying that there were now literally centimeters of Jewish homes that were over the new municipal lines. And the Supreme Court of the State of Israel ordered that those houses be knocked down. On the other hand, the Palestinian Authority has created this massive web of illegal construction. And the State of Israel has taken virtually no action against it. So I'm going to just try to run through very quickly 3 methods of how the Palestinian Authority annexes Area C. It's essentially a de facto annexation. The first is strategic illegal construction, and we'll look at what that looks like. It's all those purple dots. The second is agricultural land seizure. The Palestinian Authority has taken very, very mass scale advantage of a loophole in Ottoman land law, which provides that if you use a piece of land, no matter how you acquired it, even if you stole it, if you use a piece of land for agricultural purposes for a certain amount of time, it can no longer be considered state land. It gives the farmer or the person who's using that land certain rights to the land, and it can no longer be considered Israeli state land. So the Palestinian Authority, with massive European support, has launched tremendous agricultural land seizure projects. They call it Juthur, which is the Roots Project, and the European Union heavily funds the creation of these agricultural land grabs.
Yeah, and Norwegian students go to the areas to plant trees. And
Correct. So these trees, although they look very lovely and very pastoral, they are actually a method of annexation, and they are completely illegal. The third method is through land survey and registration. The Palestinian Authority has within its government a branch that is the Palestinian Land Registry. They employ over 600 people who are full-time employees who are carrying out a full land survey and registering ownership of land in Area C. The State of Israel has refrained from carrying out a survey and registration of land in Area C since 1968 because of international pressure, no other reason. So this is a serious problem that the State of Israel has failed to address. But let's take a quick look at what this really looks like. Illegal construction, which is massively funded by European governments and other organizations. How do they do it? It's really quite ingenious. It starts like this. This doesn't look very, very impressive. What this is a water tanker. The Palestinian Authority places tanks of water in strategic points throughout the area that they want to take over. And then they go away because they know that the most vulnerable populations, the most easily moved populations, are the Bedouin, the nomadic Bedouin populations. And the only reason that they move from place to place is to seek water with the seasons as they change. When Salam Fayyad launched the Thyad Plan for the creation of a de facto Palestinian state, he declared, this is a direct translated quote, "The Bedouin are the foot soldiers of Palestinian independence." What that means is they place these water tankers where they want the Bedouin to congregate and remain. And there you have it. You have a congregation of population around a free water source. Very, very quickly, you have here European Union assistance and all of these prefab structures, and they create an outpost. They create what they call a village. And you'll see it. We have documented dozens, more than dozens, hundreds of these outposts. You'll notice that all the structures in these quote unquote villages are identical. They are provided by the European Union. They are all bear the European Union symbol in order to grant them diplomatic immunity. There are European countries that have actually threatened to sue the State of Israel if Israel demolishes these, if and when, on the rare occasions Israel removes one of these illegal outposts. The foreign governments, including Belgium and France and others, sue Israel for demolishing their property, even though they know full well that these outposts are illegal. They were built illegally without permits, and in general are extremely environmentally hazardous. They are hazardous to the people who live there, and they are politically, they're dynamite because they're placed in strategic areas. So again, we've documented dozens of these. But this is just a very small part of it. This is what we began to notice in the E1 region. But in other places, like in Gush Etzion, this is a map of illegal structures that are in Area C on the verge of the Jewish community of Efrat. And these are not these prefab tent, mobile units, and they're not tents. They are brick and mortar, full-size, massive buildings with roads, with electricity pipes, electricity lines. All of this, again, I will show it to you. This is the road that leads to the Jewish community of Efrat. All of this is illegal construction, and all of it is built literally on the fence of the Jewish communities in order to keep the Jewish communities from connecting to one another, from expanding. All of this is built without permits. All of this is built without planning. All of this is built in order to create facts on the ground. And the European Union funds all of this. So we actually track.
So do people live in all these houses?
Yes, they live there. They live there. There are some other places where I would show you where there are full cities that have grown up, and we're talking about thousands of permanent structures in IDF firing zones, training grounds, all on Israeli state land, all strategically placed in order to create a contiguous Palestinian presence in areas. We actually measured the amount of area covered by illegal structures and the number of illegal structures that we found throughout Area C. This is the data itself, but we put it out in a graph so that
Is it possible to increase the size of the numbers?
I will
because
try.
If people will watch this on a small screen, they may not.
I will try. Let me see if I can.
If you just
that.
Yeah, like that, or even if you
Better.
Use full screen also, just for this slide under view.
Let's see.
Anyway, it's much better now.
Okay.
Yeah, here we go.
There you go. Okay, so we counted. We actually counted. We not only do field work, we purchase aerial photos and GIS anchored, that's satellite images of all of these areas, and we count the number of structures. We compare them over time so that we can see exactly what's happening. You will note that Arab construction in Area C has increased by, I'm going the wrong way, I apologize, has increased by 76.5% in the 10 years since the launch of the Thyad Plan, whereas Jewish construction, legal, permitted Jewish construction, has increased by less than 20%.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a massive differential. And we see it all through the territory. But
so what would you think is the number of homes?
So this is
this
chart right here.
Okay.
We have documented over 60,000 illegal structures in Area C that exist today.
Yeah, because in Norway, some of the most critical sources say that, or what they accuse Israel of destroying a few hundred Palestinian homes every year annually.
Correct.
So
we're talking about
it's nothing compared to all the building.
Correct. So I'm going to show you some data on that as well. I'm going the wrong way again. I apologize. Again, we also measured the amount of space in dunams that is actually covered by this illegal construction. So it's not only the number of structures, but I would stress that Israel, when it gives building permits and Jewish construction does occur in Area C, we build upwards in order not to waste land resources, whereas the Palestinian Authority, because its entire purpose for this construction is to take over as much land as possible, they build out. So they have one of the lowest population densities anywhere for the Arab sector in Area C. They build these massive structures and only a few people are living in them. So we track all of these things. Another interesting tactic that fits into this question of illegal construction is the construction of schools, illegal schools. What you see on this map here are schools, Palestinian Authority schools in Judea and Samaria. You'll note how many of them are in Area C. We have documented and researched over 100 of them. All of these schools, they look like, these are camouflaged at the moment. You'll notice that they're not in a place where people actually live. This is what they look like. I have many, many pictures. This one is on an archaeological site.
Why are they camouflaged?
Why are they camouflaged? They're built practically overnight at the end of August, so that on September 1st, there are children sitting there. And if Israel dares to knock down a school, you get a massive public relations black eye, because you're denying the most vulnerable children an education. We've also mapped out, I'll go back to that map, mapped out the distance between the new schools and existing schools in Area B or Area A. Almost all of these schools, notice how close they are to one another, and notice how close they are to existing schools.
Yeah.
The density of the student per school building per classroom ratio in the Palestinian Authority is far lower, I'm talking about by dozens of percent, than it is in Israel proper, than it is in Jordan, for example. They're building these schools for political reasons. And you'll notice where they are and where they are not. We measured the distances between these illegal schools and existing schools. Some of them are as far away as 200 meters from an existing school building. Some of them, the most distant of all, are 3 kilometers away from an existing school.
Wow.
I don't know about you, but when I was growing up and I went to school, I traveled far more than 3 kilometers from my home to school every day. Yeah. So they're building schools because it is a fabulous tactic, because Israel cannot win. If you knock down the school, you are criticized internationally. If you don't knock down the school, immediately, a new community is built all around it.
Yeah.
And these are all the countries that are supporting these illegal schools. See if you recognize anyone there. We've got Sweden, we've got Britain, we've got Ireland, we've got Denmark, Belgium, France, Italy, Spain, the European Union itself. They're all over Area C, and they pop up practically overnight. This is also on an archaeological site, a site that was cited specifically in the Oslo Accords as an area of the Palestinian Authority, as a protected archaeological site. It's in a village that straddles the line between A and C. This is one right down the road from where I live, Nebi Samuel, tomb of the prophet Samuel, in Area C completely. This one is at Susia on an archaeological site. Notice again the European Union sign. Here's more European Union over and over. This one is at the Herodian. I've unfortunately cropped the picture so you can't see. This is a World Heritage Site up here, the city and burial place and castle of King Herod. And they built a school here. Notice the
where no one lives.
This is the community that it is serving. There's no one here, but we took this picture over a year ago, and now there are structures all over here. You notice that they started these paths all along these access paths that they built with European funding. There are houses now. It starts with a school and it goes from there. Here's another one. Notice the community that it is serving. There's also another school less than 2 kilometers away. This is on land that belongs to the Jewish community of Kochav HaShachar. This is a drone image that we took before the school was completed. We went to the civil administration. We complained about the school. We actually went to the courts. Work stop orders were issued. Demolition orders were issued. And I can tell you that last year, when the United Nations launched its humanitarian aid package for Palestine, it broadcast from this completed school building and the community around it. knowing full well that it has no permits, it is not legal, but they broadcast from there. Now, this school, again, has no running water, has no sewage, has no electricity, has no, of course, air conditioning or anything else. It has no playgrounds. It has no bathrooms. It is built for political purposes, and children are bussed in every day to sit there in order to take over this piece of territory. So I actually made this short video, which you can see on our YouTube channel. I don't know if we have time to show
Shalom. We're in the heart of Area C in Judea and Samaria. And what you see here behind me is...
So it was safe for you to go there?
Oh yeah, it's actually back to back with a Jewish community. And again, it's not in the middle of an Arab community. There's no one there. Look around. Nobody lives there.
Yeah.
Judea and Samaria. Particularly...
oops, I'm going to pass. Just to give you an idea of who's in on this game, these were pictures taken in an IDF firing zone, which has since been abandoned. The IDF had to keep withdrawing further and further away because more and more civilians were building homes. See if you recognize any of these funders. Yeah, all of this is all in an IDF firing zone, back to back with the Jewish communities of Carmel and Ma'on. Here are more schools. They are practically prefab. They go up almost overnight, and they all look very, very similar. These ones, these are the brick and mortar ones, but they're all built under humanitarian aid and civil protection funding clauses from the European Union. So this is what you see when you look inside all of these purple dots. Some of them are created simply by moving Bedouin there to seek water. Some of them are built around schools, but they are all illegal construction in Area C. They also, I would point out, pose a more serious threat to the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan than they do to the state of Israel, perhaps. You'll notice where they are, and once this is allowed to become the spine of the Palestinian state, it will completely destabilize Jordan, where over 80% of the population self-identify as Palestinian, and it was created as a Palestinian state, but it will become redundant if a Palestinian state is allowed to develop here. But that's, again, a talk for another day. What we noticed also, we marked the points in green where these illegal outposts are comprised of more than 80% of European Union structures, meaning that these places would not exist if the European Union didn't put them there. And you'll notice the concentration all around Jerusalem. This is in order to disconnect Jerusalem from Area C. You'll notice here as well. What you'll also notice is that the European Union doesn't have outposts like this anywhere here, doesn't fund anything like that in areas A or B, or in Jordan, or in Syria, or in Lebanon. Nowhere else in the world does the European Union build, only here. And you have to ask yourself why that is. I have an answer. It starts with an A.
They wanted to help the Palestinians, the poor Palestinians. They don't have enough houses, isn't it?
That's a very, very good point. So this, by the way, relates to what you mentioned before about the number of demolitions. According to the European Union, you can see here, 319 Palestinian-owned structures were demolished or seized in 2019. This is their data. This is how much money was lost, European taxpayer money, because illegal structures, which they knew were illegal to begin with, were demolished by the state of Israel. And I would also point out that in the contracts for construction that the European Union signs with Palestinian contractors, they add in the costs of demolition because they know that it's illegal and they know how much that will cost them, but they do it anyway. Now, what you said is a very, very important point, and we have researched this point very, very intensively, because the main claims of European governments and of leftist organizations and anti-Israel voices say the reason that the Palestinians build illegally is two reasons. Really, it's one reason, and that is they have to live somewhere. They don't have enough housing, and Israel doesn't give them permits, so they have to build illegally. So we decided that we should try to figure out if this is really the case. This is simply a map calculating all of the area of Judea and Samaria, area A, area B, area C, nature reserves, how much usable land there is. I would also point out that these blue dots here, all of these blue dots on the map, are the Jewish communities of Judea and Samaria. I know that it's very hard to see them. That's because they're so small. The sum total of Jewish settlement in Judea and Samaria is less than 1% of the total territory of Judea and Samaria. When taken as a percentage of area C, which is the only place where there is Jewish settlement, it's less than 2%. So it's very small. However, we decided to investigate really and see if the Palestinians have somewhere to build, or if there really is a humanitarian crisis, a housing crisis. So we purchased satellite images, and we measured how much of the space under full Palestinian Authority control is available for construction. Is there room to build in areas that they don't need Israeli permits? And what we found is that 63% of the available land in areas A and B is empty. And that doesn't include nature reserves, and it doesn't include unusable areas. 63% of the viable territory of areas A and B is empty. The Palestinians could easily solve any housing shortage, if there is one, by building in areas that they don't need any Israeli permission to develop. Instead, they pour all of their resources into illegal construction in area C. We have all the data that went into creating all of this. If anybody's interested, I can send it along. It's plain and simple. In my mind, it's a blood libel. Israel is portrayed as denying very basic human needs to Palestinians in Area C. The truth of the matter is that this is a complete lie. And the truth of the matter is, in addition, no one knows how many Arabs actually live in Area C. That, again, is a talk for another day. But many of the people who are populating these illegal outposts in Area C actually are registered as homeowners in areas A and B. And the Palestinian Authority, including the current Prime Minister Shtaya, has incentivized Arabs from areas A and B to move into Area C in order to take over land. They give them free education, they give them tax incentives, they give them licensing, they give them free land. It's very easy to give something away for free when it doesn't belong to you. And that's the situation. So this is what we've been looking at up till now is the results of illegal construction that is funded heavily by the European Union and European governments. So the second system, which I will just run through very quickly, the second system of annexation is this agricultural takeover. Anyone who's interested in more details on it, we have a full report on the Roots project available on our website. At the end of this presentation, I'll show you the address to access all of those reports. But what we see is this sort of thing. The Europeans fund heavily agricultural work. They call it humanitarian aid for local farming. In fact, they send people out into Area C in order to plant things and take over land. It's as simple as that. And what you'll see here, for example, here's Canada. Here's all the countries are involved in this. They have massive infrastructure work. They make roads and build communities around them, as we've seen before. And the governments of the world simply participate in this de facto annexation of Area C. This is a map of where we found different types of agricultural annexation. This is, again, from the report, which you can access on our website. And the final one, which is very, very difficult to illustrate with photos, but if you go out into Judea and Samaria on any given day of the week, you will see surveying teams surveying and registering land. They have a whole website in which the entire Palestinian land registry, the land registry of Palestine, is made public. Unfortunately, this land registry completely ignores the existence of Jewish communities. So they simply register land on which Jews are currently living in Area C as part of Palestine. And you say, okay, so what difference does it make what they do? Well, since Israel has not created any land registry, the only land registry that will exist at the end of the day will be theirs. And this will become the standard. and will be used in international tribunals, and it will be used in courts, even in the Israeli courts, because there is no alternative. And this
so they operate freely, these workers operate freely in Area C?
Yes.
Mm.
No one stops them.
Mm.
And this is what they do.
It's the break of Oslo agreements. So the Norwegian government should be concerned.
100%. 100%. In 2019, Prime Minister Ashtaya announced once again, and he has announced it over and over again, there is no distinction in terms of between areas A, B, and C for the Palestinian Authority. They have completely abandoned the entire framework of Oslo. So when you have a treaty, an agreement, which constitutes international law, but only one side feels that they are bound by it, what you have is chaos. And the state of Israel must address these challenges before it's too late. So anyone who's interested in more material on any of these topics, I'm going the wrong way again, I apologize, can sign up for our quarterly updates on our website. These are how you find us. If you want to access any or all of our research, documentation, analysis, it's all on the website, regavim.org, in English or in Hebrew. We don't have any translation at the moment into more exotic languages. I know you don't consider yourselves exotic, but we do. We are very, very active on Facebook and Twitter, and often put up breaking news or important court decisions or developments on Facebook and Twitter, so you can follow us there as well. And also, anyone who's interested in specifics or would like more details about any of this, I welcome you to be in touch with me directly. I'm very easy to find. Anything that you send on any of these platforms in English comes to me, because I am the entire international division of Regavim. Or you can write to me by email directly, naomi@regavim.org, naomi@regavim.org. And I'll be happy to provide more materials or answer any questions that you might have.
Great. Thanks a lot, Naomi, for joining us and giving us this presentation. It certainly is an eye-opener for many, I think. And we'll be in touch.